Who has two thumbs, attended a Southern Baptist private elementary school, and grew up thinking gay people needed to be healed and that prayer is a solution to many of life's great problems? This guy right here. So, to begin, I'd like to say that I'm going to be making some generalizations. Ultimately, I am only speaking from my lived experiences. So, cultural and social norms that I'm describing are relevant to those who had a similar upbringing to my own during a certain period of time. With that out of the way, I believe that most black people in America were raised in a socially conservative environment. When I say social conservative, I am referring to cultural and sociological factors. Most black people in my peer group are politically progressive. On the one hand, my parents were alive for the civil rights movement. They attended marches on Washington and protested the war in Vietnam. They are in favor of social safety nets, police, and prison reform, and don't tend to vote for Republicans. On the other hand, they also often used less than charitable terms to refer to gay and trans people, including some members of our family. They saw things like addiction, neurodivergence, and the desperation of poverty as personal failings. It wasn't unusual for the adults in my life growing up to prescribe scripture or prayer or church as a partial remedy for whatever ails you. This is what led the people who raised me to decide that a public school education, even in a community with highly ranked public schools, would not cultivate enough moral fiber. So they enrolled me in private school. I'm not going to name the institution here, but know that this school in the 80s and 90s used to have bonfires where they burned rock and roll albums. A school that told you dressing as a witch or a ghost on Halloween was blasphemous. A school where they had an after-school counseling program to treat you and cure you if you came down with a case of the gay. Yeah, not making that up. Thing is, despite being in a wealthy white neighborhood and having an almost all-white faculty, 3/4 of the student body was black. But hold on, it gets better. Those same parents of mine who both worked 40 hours a week, at least in my early childhood, would get up at the butt crack of dawn every Sunday, put on uncomfortable formal wear, drive clear across town, and sit in the pews of a Southern Baptist church to get screamed at for 3 to 4 hours. The fact that this often meant skipping breakfast in the rush was the biggest sin, as far as I'm concerned. Did I enjoy this? Well, I'd say, as a child with severe ADD, being woken up early, squeezed into uncomfortable clothes, skipping breakfast, and being forced to sit still quietly in a hot, stuffy sanctuary for 4 hours, it was about as enjoyable as a child's blue-collar father giving up his Sunday morning to wear a suit and tie and drive a complaining, irritable family across town to sit and put up with this.
Showed out by cool in the furnace. Showed up. They're crying out of pain. They're crying out of lack. They're crying out of disappointments. But the Bible said David turned a deaf ear.
This, surely he'll get me through that. As he gets me through this, surely he'll get me through that. He's built my muscles, y'all. I'm drinking my milk and I'm getting strong.
You thought I was joking about the getting screamed at, didn't you? Southern Baptist ministers are the heavy metal frontmen of the cloth. But my parents did it. Nonetheless, for years during my childhood, that was our Sunday ritual. My older sibling would go on to become more and more involved in the church. Thing is, every black peer that I have can share a similar story of their upbringing. Black neighborhoods tend to have the highest concentrations of Christian churches. Black church attendance outweighs that of any other ethnic group by percentage. Now, at this point, I'm not going to go on a militant atheist screed. I have plenty of criticisms of modern Christianity, and being a based hotep, I consider it the religion of the colonizers to begin with. I also recognize that a lot of our views are shaped by our environment in our upbringing, and for us, this is no different. I know from experience that a lot of my views and rhetoric in my childhood were influenced by my Christian upbringing. I was raised socially conservative, even though my parents had very progressive economic and political views. I experienced a period of rebellion and rejection of the values that were instilled in me in my youth, but there was a brief period of time when I was fully indoctrinated into the Western Christian ethos. And I don't think that I'm alone. The overwhelming majority of my peer group can share the same anecdotes, relate the same experiences. I will say again that at no point will I be openly insulting Christianity or any organized religion. For that matter, this isn't about mocking or deriding those with a conservative background. I already made that video. On the contrary, I believe that the more we know about our potential audience, the better chance we have at speaking to them where they are and bringing people around to our ideas and way of thinking. With that in mind, I intend to explain why so many of my brothers and sisters were raised leaning socially conservative and how we can engage with that. So let's go back to when you were a child. Think for a moment. What was the first social hub you remember? Where did your community meet to socialize, to date, for weddings, funerals, celebrating newborns? For many, this was the church. Especially in the southern United States, but really in major cities across the United States, the church is the strongest and most enduring hub in the community. When people are hungry, the church provides. The church also gives people connection for housing, they raise money for medical bills, and they provide essential social needs. I don't like to generalize all black religious institutions, but they do tend to lean socially conservative. And yet, right now, even as you watch, there are probably older members of the congregation who were alive during the civil rights movement and have done more than myself or anyone watching this video to fight for equality and black liberation. For some, adopting socially conservative values is a survival mechanism. We don't choose to live under capitalism and white supremacy. We are forced to. That decision was made for us, all purely by being born here. Social conservatism was in vogue for centuries and having any hope of finding security under capitalism. In an era of chattel slavery, church was often the only source of social and emotional empowerment for the community. In the modern era, one must still wear the clothes and adopt the socially acceptable hairstyles and aesthetics of the Eurocentric power structures to obtain even half the opportunity at getting a leg up. So, what do we do with this information? Well, are there large communities of black voters in America with socially conservative views? Yes, there are, absolutely. More often than not, however, despite these socially conservative views, they're some of the most dependable progressive voters. And it should be noted that if we are discussing the voting masses, there is a far larger population of white, socially and politically conservative voters in this country. And they also tend to be far more represented amongst those who hold institutional power. And despite this, I encourage you to have an honest conversation with an older black voter or pastor sometime, if you haven't done so. You would be surprised to learn the work being undertaken in black communities all over the country to fight for housing, liberation, and economic freedom for all people of the African diaspora. Black radicals have always existed in the United States. Denmark Vesey was a freed slave who was arrested in the 1800s and ultimately lynched for planning a slave revolt. Before that, guess what he did? He founded a Methodist church. I went to church when I was younger. I attended a Southern Baptist private school. I was made to cut my hair, dress conservatively, and praise self-determination. My parents were both born into poverty and were able to establish financial security by the time that I was born. So yes, I was raised conservative, socially. And yet, they never failed to educate me on the struggle faced by our ancestors and the ongoing fight for freedom and liberation in the present. For those of you with any sort of platform or audience, I want to leave you with this. There are large swaths of the black diaspora in this country that have a similar upbringing to my own, and people aren't making much effort to speak to them where they are. Learn to tailor your message. Thanks for watching.